All right, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Influencer, where I interview top business leaders, give you actionable content so that after you're done watching today's show, you can go back to your business and apply everything you've learned in today's show. So with me, I have a good friend of mine. I've got a phenomenal leader, someone that I've looked up to for a long time in my life, Mr. Mark Paul. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brandon. It is great to be on your show today. Thanks for asking me to be on here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today, Mark, I wanted to have a conversation with you about leadership because I think that you and I see it the same way in that regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of what kind of business you have, leadership is the thing that I believe will take a company to its greatest potential. And the lack of leadership will be the thing that keeps a business from growing. Would you agree?
Absolutely. We have had many discussions over the years about this topic, and many people pontificate about leadership, what it is, what it isn't. And the reality is most people get it wrong because they're looking at it from a perspective of positional leadership, meaning they have influence, they can tell somebody what to do and they go do it. And so they feel like they have leadership. But the end of the year, the end of the period of time, the results don't reflect that proper leadership was in place.
That's exactly right. And we're going to unpack all of that, what you just said on today's show. So before we dive in too deep, take a quick second, Mark. Help the audience understand who you are. Bring us back to when you got started in business to present day.
Absolutely. I was educated as an electrical engineer. And so I like to apologize up front. I'm a recovering engineer now. And I like to look at it in the fact that as an engineer, what I did gather from that was the ability to study a situation, find the problems, and then come up with a solution. That's really what leadership ends up being at the end of the day, finding solutions for problems. And so on a bigger scale, you're finding solutions for many, many people as your leadership grows. So my journey became, I got tired of being stuck in a manufacturing plant, just doing, working on getting the plants running efficiently. And I liked people, I liked interacting with people, and I wanted to get out and have more options in my life. And so as I left the automotive engineering world, I very quickly gravitated toward wanting to be an entrepreneur, someone who could control my schedule, control my work. And so the first step toward getting toward that, I actually leapt from just being an engineer into sales engineering when I worked for General Electric. That was such an eye-opener to work for a very flat organization, meaning there weren't a lot of levels of hierarchy. And the leadership reputation that General Electric has is phenomenal still to this day. Back then, it was under the leadership of Jack Welch, who many books have been written on leadership about. And he did one thing that was very unique in that time, and that was he gave a lot of responsibility to a very flat organization. And if the people didn't perform, he just got rid of them. Neutron Jack, he just wipe out the people that weren't performing. There's pros and cons to that approach, but it was my best eye-opening experience to what leadership could be. And then after leaving General Electric and going out into business on my own, I very quickly learned what worked in leadership and what didn't.
I love it. I love it. Well, let me ask you that. I mean, that's probably a good place to start. What do you believe, from Mark Paul's lens, what do you believe it means to be a leader?
So in my opinion, leadership is such a broad word that it's hard for it to be used unless you give it context. So the way I love to look at it is that there's good leadership and bad leadership. Leadership is just influence. It's influence in solving problems. And so you can have very poor leadership where there's actually somebody leading and there's actually a lot of people following, but maybe that leader's taking people in the wrong direction or in a direction of potential death of the organization or the company. Proper leadership is influencing people in a positive direction. And so if you have that ability to lead people in a way that influences others and it impacts them in a positive way, now you have true, in my opinion, what leadership should be identified as. And the realistic issue is that many people are trying to lead without the proper skill sets. And so they're really, some, have some natural skills that are allowing them to attract people, but the people don't stick long enough because they see that the person truly can't get them to where they need to go.
So that's so funny you bring that up. And I totally agree, by the way, because really the next thing that I think is important for the audience to take away from today's interview is, how do you get the most from somebody? How do you, when you're building up a team, when you're building up an organization, building a company, from a leadership perspective, what are some things, Paul, that you think can help human performance and help people on your team reach their highest level of potential?
So you added a word into this conversation that's critical, and that word was team. And so leadership without a team means you're just going for a walk, right? Nobody is following you.
Right.
And so as a leader grows, and you as an individual can be a leader in your home, you can be a leader in your community, you can be a leader in your business, and they're not all universal. There are different skill sets required for that. But the way that you get a team to start to form and then have that team have a positive culture is all the reflection of the leader. And if you can look back, the simplest way I like to help people look at how a team builds, remember back in, say, elementary school, and it was time to play kickball, right? And you had to create two teams. Whose team did you want to be on? You wanted to be on the team that had the leader that had performance results. They were the ones that usually won. They could kick the ball, into the outfield. They were a fast runner. They had results in playing that game. And that's what people look for as far as what team do I want to join. They look for the leader who has results, who also will make them feel good at the end of the day, which is extremely important. And the other side of that coin is that leader has to be able to help that team perform and get paid.
I love it. I love it. Makes a ton of sense. And I totally agree. I mean, the other thing that I think comes up often is there are people in this world, right or wrong, good or bad, that believe leadership is like this reward, like this thing, that this idol type position, something to strive for. I believe leadership is a sacrifice. What's your thought on those two things? Because people think leadership is very sexy. What's your take on actually being a leader? Do you think it's more of a reward or a sacrifice?
It is both, but most importantly, it is a sacrifice. The reason that people have the other opinion so heavily about it being a reward is corporate America. Typically, people are promoted into leadership positions not necessarily based on merit. It's many times based on longevity, right? How long someone's been with a company. Well, they've been here. We need to promote them. What's the next level? Management.
Sure.
And so then all of a sudden you've got people propped into leadership positions that should never have been there, especially like from the engineering world. Most engineers aren't great leaders, right? They're really good at solving problems in a manufacturing environment or whatever the environment would be. But because their people skills typically are so lacking that they make extremely poor managers, let alone leaders. And so these people get pushed up the corporation, rewarding, right? And thinking that, okay, I've earned this, where the reality is leadership is something that you have to have proven results to truly you really put yourself in a position based on the sacrifices that you make. And that was one lesson I learned from my dad years ago. He said, never ask someone to do something you are not willing to do yourself. And more importantly, if people see you doing it, then most likely you won't have to ask them as often to do it.
Yeah, that's great advice. That makes a ton of sense. And you had mentioned too, and I didn't have this as far as something I was going to discuss on the show, but you talked about manager, versus leader. I think those lines get very blurred, and so really quickly, what is the difference to you, a manager versus a leader? Are they the same to you, or are they different?
So they are very different. Most people do not see the difference.
Yep.
And so once again, it goes back to positional leadership, which in reality is just management, right? They're in a position of influence, not necessarily earned in that position. And so they are telling people what to do. And when people are told what to do, they're not as apt to do it, or at least do it to their best potential. And so a leader inspires, not directs. That's the real difference. If you can inspire someone to do something, they'll be much more effective, and the output of that production will be so much greater.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the thing is, right now, the world in many different facets is changing rapidly. One of the things that is undeniable is that leadership from the past will be different than leadership of the future. And one of the things, Mark, that I try to practice is the leaders from the past, just to your point, thought of it through the lens of being a manager. I want people to work for me. I operate from a place of servant leadership where I believe I work for the people that are on my team. What's your thought on servant leadership versus this whole thing from the past of, hey, I'm going to go work for this manager?
Yeah, servant leadership is the key, and there's books on it. The one thing that really impressed me the first time I met you was the fact that you were a voracious reader. You were learning. You were always trying to get information in. If you're not reading and learning and getting mentored from someone who has more experience and greater success than yourself, you'll never be a very effective leader. You can't keep growing if you're not getting new in. It's like planting a seed out in the yard and never adding water. It's not going to grow. The same thing happens with an individual. If you're not adding great information and great advice and information from someone outside of yourself, you'll never be able to get where you need to go. And you will definitely not be able to lead people in a positive way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have my consulting company now where I help real estate agents all over the country grow their business. And what would you say, Mark, to somebody based on what you just said that has a tough time understanding that the best investment is in themselves, right? And they have a tough time paying for coaching, consulting, because they look at it as an expense rather than an investment. And they don't understand that investment in themselves will 10x their results long term. They look at it from a scarcity mindset. They say, I'm not going to pay for coaching. I'm just going to try to figure this out on my own. What would you say to that person?
So it's really hard to convince a person against their will, right? They are set that they do not need that, or that they already know what's in the book or what that coach mentor. It's really reflection of their mindset. And so what it does is it saves you time as a leader. I'm not going to invest in someone who's not willing to invest in themselves, because it's like pushing a car that's in park. It's just not going to happen. They're stuck. And so it's very rare that you find an individual that has that desire and that willingness to say, okay, I don't know everything, but I want to. And many people will say it just to get the job or the promotion or whatever. But the reality is you don't ever have to tell someone that you're a reader. It just comes out. Like you're quoting stuff, you're talking about issues that the average individual isn't running across on TV.
Yeah.
And so it gives you, the leader, an inside view on this individual that maybe you were planning on bringing on board or working with or investing time with. If they're saying, I just can't do that. But there's another side of that coin as well. Many people have just never done it. I resisted reading for a couple decades. In fact, I had made this really ridiculous promise to myself when I left college. I said, I will never read another book. I honestly said that. I was sick of it. I went through, a bachelor's and then 2 masters. And I said, I'm done. I know everything I need to know. I hate school. I hate reading, blah, blah, blah. And all that was true until I wanted to get ahead further than what that level of education had gotten me. And that was when I had an eye-opening experience. It was actually my wife who was reading, and I watched the change happen so dramatically in her life in a period of 30 days. It was literally that fast. She'd started reading voraciously, and I thought to myself, if I don't start reading, I'm never going to be able to catch up. I could not believe the changes it made in my wife. Firsthand, I watched her. And so that inspired me. Once again, leaders inspire. They're not told what to do. I can tell someone to read a book. They most likely won't. If I can inspire them by telling them what that did for me, then maybe that person will, because they want to, they pick it up and start reading. And the last piece of that is this, is that I learn best by watching and listening. Like I very rarely will take notes if I'm even in an educational seminar or something like that, because I learn by listening and watching. And so for me, Audible, books on audio was a massive game changer, And I also listen to them at 1.5 times speed because I can soak through so much more information. I get kind of bored if someone's talking at a normal pace. I want it fast. I want it fire hose style. And I want to be able to learn as quickly as possible. And listening to things, whether I'm working out, whether I'm working in the yard, driving down the road, I can be learning all the time. And my results go exponentially as soon as I start reading and increasing my learning.
I love it. That's like a performance hack that I talk to my students all the time. I call it automobile university. That car, we do so much driving around, have an audio book playing, feeding you great information rather than listening to the radio or the bad news. But you brought up another good point. You talked about traditional education and what the mindset that most humans on earth take from that traditional experience, that traditional education, and that there's a stopping point when school is complete. And the thing in my experience, Paul or Mark, in my experience, I don't have a formal education. I don't have a college degree, yet my career and my results has continued to skyrocket as I grow older because my learning started after traditional schooling. That's where a lot of my friends in my life, a lot of the people in my life don't understand what's been happening in my life because I'm kind of like that iceberg, that picture of that iceberg that's been underwater for so long. And people have a very difficult time learning on purpose after school. Speak on that really quick.
Yep. So the problem with what we've learned in school is it's taught us to get a good job or some type of a position. It's usually not taught to be an entrepreneur or self-motivated, self-driven, right? You do this, you get this result, learn this, and you'll be able to get a decent grade. And so we're forced the education, and the results are, hey, I just want to be told what to do, and then I'll go do it. So now those rare individuals, and honestly, there's more successful entrepreneurs who didn't go to college. I mean, we all know the classics, right? The Gates, all the big names like that haven't had these massive educations. The difference is that those individuals were driven, right? And so you could have someone who didn't go to college and still not perform. It's really what's inside. Education really doesn't matter, right? Like just because I went to college and have a couple master's degrees doesn't put me ahead. It sometimes could hinder. And so someone like yourself, you could have went to college and still could be where you're at today because you're driven in a certain way. But the way that we learn when we're self-directed is very different. So I don't tell people, hey, only read business books or only read books on selling or only read books on leadership because you'll get a very single focused learning. You really need to read in a variety of topics, and there'll be topics that you'll start to read that you never thought you'd enjoy reading if you dabble in other areas. Like I like to work on my marriage. I like to work on people skills. I like to work on sales skills. I like to work on business. I like to work on leadership. I'm not a huge history buff, but I'll tackle a history book occasionally just to keep the reading well-rounded. And then it becomes more enjoyable as well.
It's a great point. Great point. I cannot, it's so true. I've experienced that in my own life where I will read a book on something completely out of my business realm, and it helps me more from that lens than reading things inside my industry. So let me ask you this, Mark, in your experience, you're really in the business of developing leaders, right? And you've been doing it for a long time. You've done it at a big, massive scale. What are some common mistakes that you see new leaders make when they find themselves trying to help other people get results?
They stop performing themselves.
That's great.
Period. They are so now thinking, all I have to do is help these other people, and I don't have to work anymore. In the way that they got to where they currently, that level that they've currently achieved. Now they're thinking, okay, I need to help a bunch of other people do what I've done. And they switch what they were really good at doing, and they focused on something that they've never done or aren't very good at doing yet. And so they try to force these other people to grow like they did, and everyone's situation is different. You're not going to be able, most of the time you won't be able to do it. But what you will have success in doing is that new leader, that person in that position of leadership where they start building a team, they need to keep doing what they did to get to that point. And the more that they succeed doing that, more people will want to follow them and emulate the action of the leader.
I love it. I love it. Makes a ton of sense. You know, do you think there's this big debate out there, you know, are leaders born or can they learn to be leaders? What's your take on that?
I believe personally that there are some advantages that you have based on how you were raised, the experiences you've had, the schooling, the friends, all that created the individual that you were when, let's say, you graduate from high school or college. You have a certain number of skill sets and experiences. You can take that individual and create an amazing leader out of them. You're not born a leader, but some people have a whole lot more work to do to get to where they're an effective leader. But it can be done, you know, given someone, if they have an average or greater ability to learn, they have the ability to have unlimited leadership potential. But it's going to be a harder journey than others for some. And it could be, you know, man, I had a great dad, and he was an encourager. My mom was encouraged, whatever it may be. If you have been encouraged, you'll be better encouraging others. And as a leader, you're part of the sacrificing that you take to help and develop others is encouragement and pouring into other individuals to help them succeed and feel their potential. Because most people, here's the saddest part about what I've noticed in leadership over the years, most people do not believe that they deserve success, which is the exact opposite of how I know you think. Because I've heard the stories from like your father-in-law was like, man, you know, Brandon, when he was a young age, knew he was going to be successful. There are people that have that for some reason, just they know it. And there's the majority that don't believe it. And as a leader, we have to help those people feel that they can deserve whatever they work hard enough to achieve.
Love it. I love it. You know, you talked about some people with this innate ability to become leaders based on kind of their pedigree, right? My thought, and I agree, by the way, I also look at it from a little bit of a different lens too, in that I think there's something to be said from people that come from struggle, on the other hand. So do you believe that people that have bad upbringings, that have bad parenting, that were put in, that grew up in poverty and in pain and in suffering can also become great leaders? Absolutely.
And there are countless examples of that. Damon James is one of them that comes to mind, like really grew up in a very rough environment, didn't have a dad. I mean, all the things stacked against him. If you look at the past presidents of the United States, the funny thing is, if they have a brother, the classic line is one went to Yale, one went to jail. Right? Same household, same environment.
Yes.
But one greatly succeeds and one greatly fails. Epic differences between the two. Yeah. And so it's not just environment. It is a variety of factors. And, you know, there is some luck in it as well. Who you met, who your friend was, you know, maybe your older brother, younger brother that went sideways. Maybe they just had a different circle of friends because that's who was their age and their community. Like there's so many odd things. But the point is, as soon as someone feels like they can't because of that early life experience, they're the ones that will fail until they believe something different. Because you and I both have read enough books about those individuals that should have never succeeded based on their environment that made it to unbelievable wealth and success.
I'm one of them.
Exactly.
You know, that's the thing. I mean, that's the thing that drives me, Mark. When people watch what some of the things that I'm doing now in my life and they knew me in high school, they don't believe it's the same human. They would think, I mean, I was all of those things you talked about stacking against you to fail. I mean, that's my life's story. And the thing you just said about a minute ago was the game changer for me. And it's the person I met when I was 18 years old. You know, there's a lot to be said around, you know, show me your 5 friends and I'll show you your future.
Absolutely.
People just think that's like a cute, sexy saying. It is true. Period. Right. It is just true. And so let me ask you this. What can people do if they want to be a person of influence? They want to help others. They want to become a better leader. We talked about reading, how important reading is, education, the people that you surround yourself with. Are there other things, Mark, that people can do to become a better leader?
I think the number one thing, if someone says, okay, Brandon, I've had a rough, couple months here. Like this is a rough start to the year. I need to reinvent myself. I really do want to, have a different lifestyle. I want to provide better for my family. I need to do some things differently. Help. And someone who is at that point, maybe they've hit rock bottom, which is awesome. I love it when someone does, because there's only one way up. You're either climbing back up or you're going out, right? I mean, those are the only two options when you hit rock bottom. When you're at the bottom and you have a desire to not stay there anymore, you will crawl and climb and fight your way up to the top. That person, the first thing that I would say is look at yourself. And what do I need to improve about myself? Or what do people think about me that maybe I don't realize yet? And ask. Some of the people say, hey, I don't want you to sugarcoat it. I don't want you to give me the fluffy answer. I want you to be real with me. I want you to tell me if I'm offensive, if I need to improve my speech, my people skills, my ability to serve. Like sometimes people really think that they're good servants until someone says, hey, you never have done this. You never do that. You never call me. You never it's really interesting to get an outside perspective. And if you're going to grow and you want to change, you're going to need some outside feedback that can help you to determine where your weak points are. They're blind spots, and they're called blind spots because you can't see them.
Best advice ever. If you guys are watching this video now or sometime in the future, what Mark just said, you gave me goosebumps, to get an outside perspective, because I agree with you 100%. You cannot look at yourself and understand how others are perceiving you. To get that outside feedback is a gift if you're open to it. And oh my gosh, it is so powerful to get that outsider's perspective. So you recommend, going to your sphere, your closest tight-knit group and saying, guys, girls, women, whoever is in your life, I need your help. I need you to shoot me straight, right? And so that's a really cool exercise. I love that. So here's my last question that I like to end with on the show. If you go back and you have a chance knowing all the things that you know right now, as the successful Mark Paul that you are now, someone that I look up to, someone that I look at as one of my mentors, you go back and you do this whole thing over again. Knowing what you know now, what is the advice you give to the 18-year-old Mark Paul?
I got this out of a book called The Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki years ago. He said, when you start to succeed, when you start to move up in your career, in your life path, whatever it may be, you're going to have to put some of those relationships and friendships and maybe even family aside, maybe for a season, maybe for the rest of your life. If you want to win, you have to protect yourself by who is influencing you. And so I held on to certain relationships longer than I should have. The other side of it is I didn't move fast enough. You can tell if you're going down the wrong path in your life. And if I would have shortened those side tracks and got back on track, because I know where I wanted to go, but I allowed some of these other things to distract me versus keeping focused on the main thing. And then sometimes the main thing ends up being a sidetrack. You have to be able to recognize that. And that's, once again, where you need an outside mentor, someone who has had success in that area you're heading, to be able to keep you back on course. It's like going golfing. You keep hitting them off to the side. It takes a lot more strokes to get to the hole. And so if you can keep straight down the fairway in life, you'll get there a whole lot faster. And stop listening to yourself, start listening to others. And I should have read a whole lot more. As much as I've read over the years, I should have known more. That's the best way to succeed and get ahead.
That is phenomenal stuff. Mark, thank you so much for being a positive influence in my life. If people are watching this and they want to connect with you, maybe on social media or from a business relationship standpoint, how can people, reach out to you and start building a relationship with you?
Absolutely. I am on Facebook under Mark Paul. I have an email address, fearlesstribe at iCloud.com. I have a LinkedIn account. There's a lot of different ways. And I look forward to meeting a lot of people that have watched this show, and I hope it helps people in many ways. You're a leader, Brandon. Here's a great example. You have no positional leadership over me, you sent me a text and said, hey, would you be on my show? And I said, absolutely. I was excited about joining you today because you have a leader. You've influenced me in your life. I love watching all the links and the posts that you do. You've inspired me. I've talked about you. Literally, I was in Florida last week talking to some friends of mine who are realtors down there.
Wow.
You've done some amazing things, and I cherish our relationship because it's people like you that I surround myself with, because iron sharpens iron. And I know that together we can go further than we can separately.
Super humbling to hear those words come from you. That is really, really, I'm honored to be in your life too. And, I think our future has just only begun because we're going to really deepen this thing. And so, Mark, again, thank you so much for your leadership in my life. And thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks, Brandon.